Done it many times.
Looks like we're rolling.
Come double check my microphone. This part?
Microphones are on.
Okay, and this recording thing is? How do you think?
There's no source is currently selected.
Yeah, just make sure this screen is good, and then I think we're all set.
Okay.
No, I want you to take a look. Get training wheels on here.
Training
Did you
wheels.
turn that on?
Yep. Well,
Okay.
that means on, right?
Well, but you got to press it.
It was on before.
There you go.
Okay, so
All
that's
right,
good.
thank you.
You're good.
All right, we'll find out if it's not.
All right, I'm going to call the Human Affairs Committee to order on August 14th at 7:05 PM. If the clerk would please call the roll.
Alderman June Karen is absent. Alderman Belize Goya is not present. Alderman Tom Lopez, here. Alderman LeBrun.
Here.
And Alderman at Large Lori Wilshire.
Here.
We have 3 present and we have a quorum.
Thank you. Alderman Karen had a family emergency, and Alderman Melisi Golia had a family commitment this evening, so they won't be joining us. We have a period for public comment. Seeing no one, we'll move on to communications. Communications. We just received a communication from Carrie Skeena. If we could, I'd entertain a motion to suspend the rules to Alderman Lopez.
I'd like to make a motion to suspend the rules so far as to accept the communication from Carrie Schema
Okay.
and place it on file.
Motion is to suspend the rules. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the rules are so far suspended. Could I get a motion to accept and place on file? The
Motion to
communication.
accept and place on file.
Okay, that's the communication from Carrie Skeena regarding home funds. Discussion on that motion.
I
Seeing-
didn't realize we had to have a separate motion for suspending and then accepting.
We
Okay.
do. Yeah, okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries. Unfinished business, we have none. New business resolutions.
R17-117, relative to the use of U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Home Investment Partnership Program funds for 22 Marshall Street.
Does anyone want to make a motion on that? Alderman Lopez.
Can I make a motion to recommend final passage?
Motion is to recommend final passage. Carrie Skeena is here this evening. If you'd care to join us, I'm sure the committee's going to have lots of questions. We haven't seen the use of home funds for a while, especially to this magnitude, and the project looks really good, so. So if you wouldn't mind giving us an overview, that would be really great. Thanks for being here, too.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Sure.
So this project, 22 Marshall Street, is a long time in the coming from what I understand. Folks in the Community Development Division have been involved with it much longer than I have, and on the planning side at least. And the paper file is pretty voluminous. So we were excited that this project became shovel-ready and ripe for home funds. As you know, I've said in front of this committee other times that, we're always looking for a good, valid project to dedicate the home funds to and develop more affordable housing. What's somewhat unique about this property is that often we see a mixed use between affordable and mixed income. And this property is going to dedicate all 152 units to be affordable. It's 4 buildings. It's approximately a 5-acre site. Legally, it's 3 parcels, but those will be combined and restricted by deed. And the 4 buildings will be 4 stories high. There are some rough sketches and drawings attached to the memo that you can peek through. And I'll be sure that the agenda's updated and has those copies electronically so they can be posted online as well. So this site, as some of you may know, is the former location of the BB Rubber Company. And in 2003, any of the remaining buildings that were standing on that site were demolished. Following that, the property was sold in 2007, and to that date has been being worked on by that owner. And it might go without saying that a former rubber company site had extensive contamination. So this site has sat underutilized and vacant for many years because of that. The current owner was able to work with the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, develop a corrective action plan, which was nearly completed by the time that they applied for the home funds. So again, that's a little bit unique for us because often when the home funds are involved, we're still working on remediation and some of that money goes toward that. Again, it's 150 total units. It's a mix of 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms. Predominantly 2 bedroom, there will be 80 of those, and then 41 bedrooms and 32 3 bedrooms. So it will allow for a variety of types of family housing. It is not age restricted, it's open to any type of family housing that wishes to apply for that property. The project has a total development cost of about $28 million. The home fund request from the city of Nashua is $200,000. So really just a small piece of that, just a drop in the bucket. The big financer is actually through New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, and there's a breakdown on the memo of the sources and uses on the back page. It's double-sided. That shows they'll be receiving low-income housing tax credits, and then a variety of other loans through New Hampshire Housing, and then they'll move into their permanent financing. So the cost per unit, if you divide it out to the total development cost, is about $185,000 per unit, which is pretty typical for new construction. I touched a little bit about the environmental conditions at the property, and like I said, it's actually been worked on for many years now, and DES has issued partial completion certificates. They're waiting now. At this point, all the work has been done. All of the long-term monitoring wells are in place. They had to do, from what I understand, I'm not an environmental consultant, but from what I understand, like a 30-day settling period for the ground soil to settle and then retest. So those samples have been taken, and they're just waiting on the final clearance from DES. Moving forward, DES, I believe they've already recorded it, but if not, it will be recorded shortly. We'll have a permanent lien or restriction through the Registry of Deeds on this property that this site, this project and then any future buildings ever constructed on that property for residential purposes will have a depressurization system to ensure that they don't expect any vapor intrusion from the ground, but if there were to be any, it would pass that through the property. It's similar to a radon passive system. People are familiar with how, if any vapors are coming up from the ground, it gets dispersed through that pressurization system and out of the property and not into the property. So that is a fairly complicated project in a nutshell. Again, the home funds is a small portion. New Hampshire Housing is using some of their home funds as well. Their home funds is going to be a little over $1 million. And the request that came for the city of Nashua was the $200,000. So that is what is before you for consideration tonight. Happy to try to answer questions.
Alderman LeBrun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the front of your communication, it states $200,000. On the back, it lists it as $220,000.
I don't see the 220 on the left-hand side. Under sources, the Nashua home loan it's on my copy is listed as 200.
Okay, on the left, on the right, for the architect and engineer, it listed as $220,000. Is that the same?
No, they're two separate categories. So the left-hand side simply shows all of the funds going into the project.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the right-hand side, it's not tied line by line, but independent of that, where the breakdown of how the money will be spent or the uses. So typically the home funds go toward, we haven't determined it yet, but sometimes it's the upfront costs, like the architectural and engineering, and other times it's for pure construction costs. It will really depend on the senior financer, in this case, where they want to put their funds, and we'll look for which are the home eligible to put our little piece in.
Follow up?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Where exactly does the $200,000 come from?
The local home funds of the 200,000, it comes from our home entitlement that comes in every year. We get the CDBG grant and the home grant are the two, big ones that I'm usually here for anyway. And for our current fiscal year 17, we set aside about 250,000 for affordable housing development. So it's specifically going to come from that line item.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Lopez.
If this is granted, what's the time frame for, do they have a deadline where they have to use it by, or any restrictions about reporting certain progress points?
Yeah, with the home funds, there's actually pretty strict timelines. Once we give it to them, they're looking to actually start construction, relatively soon. I believe in the fall, assuming they get all their clearances from DES, Department of Environmental Services, and that we can move our pieces along. But they want to. They know that they can't take any action yet because the HUD environmental review is still pending for both us and New Hampshire Housing. But once that's clear, they've obtained all of their building permits and they're ready to go on that side. They've gone through that process already, which is independent of my department. But they will be looking to spend that fairly quickly. When we draft the formal home agreement, it will have those milestones laid out. And I believe they're looking to have construction completed within a couple of years. I think they're looking at a pretty aggressive timeline. And technically, technically the funds will be in the form of a loan. It won't be a grant.
Thank you. I used to live on Marshall Street for almost 20 years.
Wow.
This is very exciting. I lived there when it was BB Rubber, when it closed, and, it's been a while since I lived there, but that property has been somewhat of an eyesore in that neighborhood, and I think this will clean it up and give us some really much-needed affordable housing. And it's nice when you have new construction, affordable housing. Not that any affordable housing is bad, but I think, people having an opportunity to live in a new place is really kind of exciting, I think. And it's a win-win for that area too, because that property has been in disarray for some period of time, as you mentioned. But for $200,000 from the city's home funds, I think a $28 million project for affordable housing is pretty exciting to me, anyway. Alderman LeBrun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned that this would be in the form of a loan, not a grant. What would the interest rate be?
Typically on the Nashua home loans, we do 0% interest. The underwriting hasn't been completed. If the project can withstand paying a nominal interest fee like 1 or 2%, there have been cases where we've added that in, but normally the debt-to-income ratio is already so tight that when we come in as a subordinate loan, we do 0%. And then when the funds are repaid, and in low-income housing tax credits, it tends to be around the 15-year mark because that's typically when they refinance under that program, and we would look to be repaid at that time.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, the motion before us is to recommend final passage. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? And that motion carries. We have Resolution 17-118.
Sorry.
It's okay.
R17-118, relative to the acceptance and appropriation of $2,900,000 lead-based paint hazard control grant from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Someone care to make a motion on that?
I would like to make a motion for final passage. To
Alderman
recommend final passage.
Alderman Lopez recommends final passage. Carrie, can you give us I don't know that we've had this grant since Alderman LeBrun and Alderman Lopez have been on the board. I'm somewhat familiar with it, but if you wouldn't mind giving us an overview.
Sure, happy to. The grant before you tonight is, the city currently has a lead paint grant from HUD. It's a competitive grant that they issue. It's good for 3 years. And this is actually, we're fortunate to be awarded our 4th one since 2007. So we apply for these. We compete nationally with cities all across the country. cities, counties, states. And, we're always very excited when we find out that we are awarded the program. It's for privately owned residential housing, and it can be either owner-occupied properties or investment properties. We do not limit the number of units, so if we had, an 8-unit rental property, if they qualified, we could do that. It is targeted toward the income of the residents. So if it's an owner-occupied property, it does need to be a low-income owner. And then, if they have a 2 or 3 family, we also have to qualify those tenants. And then in rental properties, we're looking to assist properties that have low-income tenants who are residing there. We put a 3-year deed restriction on each property that we assist so that it is rented at least for a 3-year period to low-income households, and that landlords give preference to renting to families with children under 6. That's the primary goal of the program, is to create lead-safe housing for young children. The majority of the grant does go directly to the remediation costs. A small portion, 10%, is for admin, and then there's a portion of it that we work with the Division of Public Health and Community Services, the Code Enforcement Department, and then we will be working with a nonprofit in the community who will do outreach for us. That will be an RFP, so we don't know who that is quite yet. And then we have lots of community partners who are not receiving funds, but they are our formal partners that we work closely with to implement the program.
Now, I understand we do have a lot of housing stock that does have lead here in the city, so this is really important to improve that housing stock that we have here. Alderman LeBrun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I currently have a bill in at the State House dealing with this exact problem to removal of all lead paint.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm the sponsor of that along with Senator Dan Feltus.
I've been following that closely.
Have you?
Yes, sir.
Keep up the good work, Representative LeBrun.
Yes, that bill is very exciting because it would help to increase the number of children who are tested for lead. And that is actually one of the gaps we have in New Hampshire, is although the recommendation is that children be tested at age 1 and 2 years old, the compliance with that is very low, but it just doesn't capture. Probably about 65% of 1-year-olds who should be tested are, but only about 34% of 2-year-olds are who should be. So, I always try to take the opportunity to urge parents to have their children tested, any child under 6. Typically, insurance covers that, and our health department does it for free as well.
Well, that's good information. Alderman LeBrun.
I'd just like to add that it's currently in a study committee, and we'll be getting started again on it pretty soon.
Great.
The hang-up right now is the 1 and 2-year-old. For whatever reason, it's felt that that's too young to be tested, that they should be tested before entering school and not at the 1 and 2-year-old.
Terry?
I would just like to add that there's lots of data and studies, available to argue all different sides of that point, I think. And, a lot of our neighboring New England states test annually up through age 6. I can share a personal story that my children last summer were 1.5 and 3.5, and I asked to have them tested, and the 3.5-year-old actually had a higher level, both well below the limit that it should be, but he had a higher level. And exposure comes from a variety of sources. I think for him, he likes to dig in the yard with trucks and play with lots of toys and
chew on windowsills.
yeah. So it's it's
Department
important.
of Public Works until we started talking about eating windows. No, I'm not sure.
Right. So this grant actually will do 135 units. We estimate the per unit cost to be about $12,000. The grant will not cover that full amount. A lot of times owners put in their own personal funds. To a limited degree, sometimes we can use the block grant funds that we have if it's owner-occupied housing. And then there's a component of the grant, $400,000 of the total pot is set aside for healthy housing remediation. So Each property will get an assessment, and it will depend, smoke detectors and carbon monoxide are pretty much defaults that we do in every unit. But some units may have unsafe porches or electrical issues or any other type of hazard that could be contributing to poor health in that unit. It's only about $1,500 per unit that we can spend for that work, so we're not doing large-scale remediation on that side, but we find if we're in there for lead, there's usually a lot of other issues, and try to stretch those dollars.
Well, keep up the good work. It's an important program. Motion before us is to recommend final passage of Resolution 17-118. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries.
Thank you.
very much for being here and all
Thank
the
you.
information.
Have a good evening.
Thank you, you too, Carrie. New business, we have none. General discussion. Seeing none, public comment, there's no one here. Remarks by Alderman. Alderman Lopez.
After the events of this past weekend in Charlottesville, I attended a vigil that was organized by residents in the Greeley Park area to express solidarity and support for what happened. It was a tragedy. It was recognized by all as such, and it was a breakdown of a lot of the values that we have, as a nation. And one of the charges that they made as part of the service was for each of us to go out and, as horrifying as we are as Americans, to watch American versus American throwing things at each other, getting violent, acting out. This must be terrifying for children of color. So they invited us to reach out to any children of color that we could and assure them that here in Nashua they're safe, here in Nashua they're welcomed, here in Nashua they have the same opportunities that everybody gets. So I would like to do that now and just affirm that as an elected official, I plan to do everything I can to make sure that Nashua remains an inclusive and welcoming place.
Well, thank you, Alderman Lopez. Appreciate that. Alderman LeBrun.
Madam Chair, as a follow-up to the congressional baseball game, which also produced a tragedy, on October 14th in Concord, the state legislature will be having a Republican against Democrat softball game. Softball game, and all proceeds will go to the Liberty House in Manchester.
Very nice. Well, that should be a fun game.
It will.
Alderman Lopez, are you playing?
Oh, yeah.
Sweet. Alderman Lopez.
Can those of us who are in the middle kind of just sell concessions or something? We don't have the party backing, so.
There will be all sorts of fundraisers.
Nice. Very nice. Anything further? Do I have a motion?
Motion to adjourn?
Okay. We have a double motion to adjourn. Motion is to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And we are adjourned at 7:27. Thank you very much. And thanks for doing that, Tom. Appreciate it.
Okay.